Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. It looks like we'll be getting started in just a minute here. I'm Amanda Strack. I work at Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District, and I'm joined here today with Sean Moser, who will be teaching the class, and Hattie Ann from Weber Basin, who can answer any questions concerning their area, and then also Casey Finlinson down at Central Utah. So we've got lots of people here to help with any questions. We all run programs a little bit differently, so we can direct all of the questions to that specific water district if you have them. We'll have you guys put all of your questions in the Q&A box. That way we can click on a specific question and then answer that question directly. It'll just kind of help us to keep things organized. And to get us started, I want to introduce Sean Moser. He's the Conservation Garden Park Manager, a good friend and a coworker of mine, and he'll be teaching the class today.
Cool. Thanks, Amanda. We may see Dave Rice and Savannah join. I don't know if they're going to, but they might join us also. Yeah, like Amanda said, my name's Sean Moser. I'm the Conservation Garden Park Manager for Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District. And today we're going to talk about our Flip Your Strip program. Flip Your Strip was started, it's probably been at least 5 years ago now, and it has slowly picked up steam and spread into different areas of the state. It started originally in Jordan Valley Water service area, which is most of Salt Lake County. But it has now spread into Central Utah Water service area, which is Utah County and other counties in Central Utah, and then also into Weber Basin Water service area. And Weber Basin has been adding different cities that are eligible up in their service area. So if you have questions for them specifically in their different areas they serve, we will have time for that also. But today's class, we're just going to talk about how you flip a park strip and go from a lawn park strip to a waterwise park strip, and what are the steps to do that. I know we have a lot of you joining us from different segments of the green industry and from cities and parks and rec, and you all have different expertises in different areas when it comes to this. So I want to make sure I cover everything so we're all on the same page. And Amanda, please feel free to jump in with any questions or comments as I go along. And I might ask you a few things as we go through also.
Okay, sounds good.
So what we're going to talk about today is why lawn in the park strip is a problem, the 5 steps to reclaim your park strip. We're going to talk about park strip maintenance, park strip plants that we recommend, and then we're going to go over some park strip examples at the end and some of the program requirements that you're going to find in the different areas where this program is available. So here's our typical Utah front yard. And for any of you that have heard a class from us before, you know the things that we talk about here. Most of the landscapes in Utah are about 70 to 90% lawn. That is especially the case in new neighborhoods, where a lot of money is spent on the house and then very left is left over for the landscape itself, and lawn gets installed as the main component of the landscape. But you can see some of the very traditional Utah landscape things like the kidney bean island on the left, and then lawn in areas where it doesn't really belong and can't be watered efficiently, including the areas up close to the house, and then the park strip, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So what we'd like to see is a local scaped yard. Here's a local scaped front yard, and that includes a central open shape of lawn that can be watered efficiently, but it has also removed lawn out of the areas where it can't be used for active recreation or it can't be watered and maintained efficiently. So we recommend flipping your strip. And here's some examples here. We have seen some really good park strips over the years installed by landscape professionals and homeowners have come up with some really great park strips that you can see here. And you can see there's different levels of plant density being used. The one on the left and even the one in the middle has a pretty high plant density, but even the one on the right still looks good, even though it has less plants in it. Let's talk about the problems with lawn in a park strip. The biggest one is sprinklers are not really designed to water anything less than 8 feet wide. There are sprinklers that are called strip spray heads that are supposed to water areas less than 8 feet wide, but even those struggle. And the problem is anytime you get any amount of wind, that water gets pushed out of that lawn area and onto the sidewalk and onto the concrete and the asphalt. So water waste is probably the biggest concern. And the average lawn park strip uses 7 to 10,000 gallons of water per season, which is quite a bit of water, but is in reality is just a small amount compared to the rest of the landscape. Some quarter acre residential landscapes that are mostly lawn can use about 200,000 gallons of water in a season. So you can see this is a small percentage of that, but overall, this is probably the least efficient area to have lawn, and it makes the most sense to attack this area first and get rid of the lawn. Other problems that we see is tree roots breaking concrete, and that really has to do with putting the wrong tree in the park strip, a tree that gets too big for the area. As plants have been developed by plant breeders, there are much nicer trees for the park strip these days that stay smaller, that won't cause this issue. Also, it's a pretty extreme climate. It's adjacent to hot surfaces like sidewalks and asphalts, curb and gutter, that causes a lot of reflective heat, which can be an issue. And this is an extreme example that we're showing here, but it's something that you see pretty often. Also, road salt can be an issue in the winter. Salts applied on the roads and the sidewalks can leach into the park strips and any adjacent planting beds. So plants that are in those areas need to be able to handle the salt that's applied. So this is what we're hoping for, is to create curb appeal also. So you can see on the left a flipped park strip there, and you can see it in comparison to a lawn park strip that's really not much of a lawn anymore. It looks like the homeowner has kind of given up on it because it's so hard to maintain, but you can see the waterwise park strip next to it is doing a lot better. So the park strip is an odd area for many reasons. One of the reasons is who owns it. And in most cases, the city owns the park strip, but it's maintained by the residents. So you'll want to make sure that you check any local regulations and codes if you're attempting a project like this. For the most part in Salt Lake County, we have not seen a city that will stop you from doing this, but there are homeowners associations, as you're probably well aware that will stop people from doing this. I think there are some things in the legislature that are being moved forward that will hopefully stop this, so people can install waterwise park strips. We'll see where that goes, but the HOA right now is the main organization that may prevent you from doing this. Any of the other water districts that are on right now, Casey or Hattie Ann, have you guys ran into any cities in your areas that will prevent someone from doing this?
Not that I'm aware of as of yet.
Okay. Hattie Ann, have you seen anything? No, okay. Well, we'll keep plugging away. So here are the steps to reclaim a park strip, 5 steps. So we always recommend that you start with a plan and design. Um, my training is in landscape design, and I know that you should start with a landscape design. It always ends up being better that way, but sometimes I get ahead of myself and start doing things before I have a design, and I usually always regret it. So I really recommend starting with a plan and design. Then you remove the lawn, install drip irrigation, add any hardscape paths or anything that you want to add, and then put in the plants and the mulch. So going over the 5 steps. So first is plan and design. So you want to plan where your paths are going to be in the park strip, where any plants are going to be, what type of drip irrigation you're going to use. Proper plant selection is important, and we're going to go over plants that we recommend towards the end of the presentation. But really, plants should be water-wise, salt-tolerant, and tough. And if you're looking for a way to find salt-tolerant plants, we do have a plant database on our website, conservationgardenpark.org, where you can actually search for park strip specific plants and plants that are salt tolerant. So that could help you in the future. So we also have example park strips that you can download. Example designs on localscapes.com and utahwatersavers.com. They've been designed in a modular fashion. So you can see on the page there that we have the whole design in black and white in the background, but we've blown up a 30-foot section bigger on the screen and put it in color. So basically we've designed 30 feet, and then that 30 feet should be repeated over and over again in the park strip until you fill out the whole park strip. The reason that we recommend doing it this way is most of the time when we see waterwise park strips look unkept or out of control is when there's no repetition or unity to the design. So repeating plants is a great idea. And then you want to remove existing lawn. There's several ways that you can go about doing this. And we've had contractors and homeowners do this several different ways. You can use plastic sheets and solarize the lawn. It usually takes several weeks to do that, but it's almost like when you put a kid's swimming pool on the lawn and leave it out there for too long, it bakes and fries the lawn. The plastic sheeting does the same thing. You can also kill it with herbicides like glyphosate or Roundup. Either option is okay. The glyphosate or Roundup might be a little bit quicker than using the plastic sheeting, but we want to give you all the options that are available to you. Then you want to remove the existing lawn. Lawn can be removed with a sod cutter, or it can just be tilled into the ground with a tiller. When I flipped a park strip at my old house, what I did is I sprayed it with Roundup, and then I just brought in a tiller and tilled it into the ground. And I had to dig out some soil and some lawn after that to get to the level that it needs to be. But overall, the tiller actually made it a pretty easy process and made it easy to dig things out. One thing that we're afraid of with this program and that we want all of you to be aware of is we don't want to see living lawn removed out of a park strip and then installed in either the same person's yard or someone else's yard, because from a water district's perspective, we didn't save any water. The lawn is just being watered somewhere else. So that's important to us, is making sure the lawn is removed and not installed somewhere else. You also want to mark existing sprinkler heads with flags or sticks when you're doing this process. And then be careful removing lawn around any existing trees that have roots that you can damage. Also, make sure that you call blue stakes before you do any of this work. That's a really important step. Also, with removing existing lawn, you want to make sure the lawn and soil is removed 3 to 4 inches below the sidewalk. This helps to retain the mulch that you put in the park strip. One mistake that I made 8 or 9 years ago when I flipped my first park strip is I didn't dig it down far enough, and I would always have gravel spilling out onto the sidewalk and into the gutter. So that's something to be aware of. Then you want to install drip irrigation. Here's the main 2 types of drip irrigation that you can use for the Flip Your Strip program. There's inline drip irrigation and point source drip irrigation. Inline has emitters built into the line itself. Point source has a main drip line with emitters coming out of the spaghetti line that goes to the individual plants. But this is the biggest way that we can save water in the park strip is by not throwing water in the air anymore, actually applying it to the soil itself and to the roots of the plants. One of the requirements for the Flip Your Strip program is we want you to use only one type of drip in the park strip. We've seen, especially from homeowners over the years, lots of mismatched drip systems and micro sprays and all sorts of things mixed in there. And it's best to only use one type of drip system in the park strip. So these are, here's an example of something that's not eligible, is that little micro spray there, because we don't want water thrown into the air, and bubblers are not allowed either. But what is allowed is the point source drip emitter that you see there. It looks like for whatever reason that text is off the side. We'll have to fix that. And so with the inline drip irrigation, it's best to run at least 3 rows of the inline drip in the park strip. This allows the soil to be watered evenly and the entire park strip to be watered the same. But how many rows you install really depends on the width of the park strip. We recommend that you follow the manufacturer recommendations and guidelines on how many drip lines that you install on your park strip. Typically, you're going to find inline drip irrigation installed with every 12 inches in between the lines or 18 inches between the lines, depending on the emitter spacing in the drip line. Also, a requirement and really just a best practice for this is it needs to have a filter and a pressure reducer. We've seen some people try to install these systems without those things, and really that's going to really decrease the life of the drip line that's been installed. So that's something that the conservation technicians that come out to look at these projects will check for, is they will make sure there is a filter and pressure reducer installed for the park strip. So there's one way that you can do it here. So you can see just the standard sprinkler valve, but then you can see a drip irrigation valve, which is a low flow valve that has the filter and pressure reducer attached to it. That's probably one of the main ways that we see it done. But we've also seen a lot of this done, and this is fine also. So you can take a standard sprinkler head that's used to water lawn, and you can retrofit it with a retrofit kit. And that has a filter and a pressure reducer installed into the spray head as a retrofit with a coupler to attach the drip irrigation system to. And that is perfectly fine to do. The biggest point that I want to make here, though, is the drip line cannot be on the same zone as a spray zone. So if you make the conversion, especially this way, the lawn that's being watered in the landscape by spray head still cannot be attached to the park strip that's watered by drip. They have to be on separate zones. Also, this is probably a no-brainer for a lot of you landscape professionals watching this, but be sure to leave the filter accessible for maintenance and for the final visit by our technicians that come out to take a look at this, to take a look at the projects. For whatever reason, over the last little bit, we've gone out to the projects and the filter and the pressure reducer have been buried in the ground, so we can't access them. And that means that the homeowner can't access them to clean out the filter and replace anything that needs to be replaced. So that's something to keep in mind. We need to be able to access the filter and the pressure reducer. So I just want to go over just a quick example on how you may make the conversion. So here's a standard landscape here with overhead spray in the park strip, watering the lawn and the asphalt and the sidewalk. So you can see the spray patterns there. This is one way that you can do it. So what's been done here is the more orange, the two orange sprinkler heads that you see there, those have been retrofitted to drip. And then you can see the white line there, that's drip tubing that's been installed, that's been attached to that retrofit head. And then all of the more yellow heads have been capped. So they're not actually producing water anymore out of them. They've been capped and are not part of the system anymore. So that's a good way to do it, but we know it's not as always as clean cut as that. So here's one of the main issues that we see. So here is a typical irrigation setup where the park strip lawn and the main lawn and the main part of the yard are watered by the same zone. We see that quite often, and we've actually seen this being discouraging part for homeowners as they've tried to tackle this situation, how to separate the zones. We have a couple solutions, but here's one suggestion that we have, and that's adding a new valve and then running a new PVC line, a lateral line out to that park strip from the new valve, and then installing drip line to that new valve that waters the park strip by itself, and then using the old valve to water just the lawn that remains on the other side of the park strip, and then capping the heads that were attached to that original zone. So that's one way you can do it. Sometimes another issue that comes up is a new valve has been put in, but people don't have enough spots on their sprinkler clock to wire in a new valve, which can be an issue for some people. We've actually experimented with Bluetooth battery operated valves at the garden that actually work really well. So you can just add that Bluetooth battery operated valve or controller to the new valve, and you can water it that way. So it'd be separate and running separate from the main sprinkler controller, but it is one option if you're looking to still have it run by a system or a smart clock. Also, another big point to make with watering in the park strip is existing trees need to be watered. We've seen a lot of times where mature trees are in the park strip, people come in, rip out all the lawn, and don't make a way for the trees to be watered anymore. And that's important. We need to make sure they're watering, the trees are getting watered. We don't want the Flip Your Strip program to be a tree killing program. We want to make sure the trees are getting what they need and get sufficient water. So you can create a square or a circle around the tree to water it and give it the water that it needs. Amanda, it looks like I'm moving along pretty quick here. Is there any questions at this point?
We do have one about CEU credits.
Yeah.
What's the best way for participants to make sure they get their credits?
Yeah, so I sent out an email to all participants before the class with instructions on CEUs. It's at the bottom of the email. I will send out an additional email after the class with CEU instructions. But the biggest thing is you'll have to request the CEU yourself. So you'll have to click on the link that I send out. You'll have to fill out a form, and then it will be submitted to the UNLA, and then we'll check to make sure you attended the class, and then you should get your CEU that way.
Thank
Any
you for
other-
addressing that.
Yeah, any other questions?
Yeah, we also have a question about the specs for the Bluetooth solution.
Oh yeah, so they're just wondering what it is, I
Yeah, that's
guess.
guessing.
So I'm trying to remember the brand. It may be Hunter, the one that we've used. I don't remember the brand for sure, but it's actually pretty common now to find at sprinkler supply stores or even online. Essentially, it's just a little battery powered clock that sits on top of the valve that you installed. And then you access it via Bluetooth with your phone. And that allows you to edit the schedule and change the schedule and turn it off for the year. So it actually works pretty well that way. I'll see if I can find the exact brand and send out that information in the email that I send out afterwards.
We
Any
have a
other?
follow-up about CEUs. Scott Higgins is saying, I'm not a landscaper, I sell rubber mulch. If I hire a landscape company to do the work, do I file or do they file for the CEU?
No, it's the CEUs are only for the people attending the class today. So
Okay,
I
hopefully
don't
that
know.
resolves it. I'll let
Yeah,
you know if there's a follow-up question.
they may be asking about the program requirements and who files for that. So, or to complete the program. Okay, are we good to move forward?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Step 4, adding hardscape. So this is creating pass-through areas in the park strip. You want to make sure the path is large enough for safe passage. So one of the reasons that we recommend doing this is with a lawn park strip, it's easy for someone to park their car next to it and for the passenger to step out right onto the lawn and then walk across the lawn onto the sidewalk and wherever they need to go. That's not as easy with the waterwise park strip because you have other plants in it and rocks and things like that. So that's why we recommend adding these little hardscaped paths into a park strip. They don't need to be very big, and they're usually pretty easy to install, but they make a lot of difference for accessibility to the sidewalk and to the street. And usually they add a lot of visual appeal to the park strip too. Um, you want to make sure that you're running your irrigation lines or drip lines underneath the path too. This is one way that we've done it. So we've used the PVC sleeve where the underneath where the path is going to go, but make sure you're using blank drip irrigation tubing through that sleeve so you're not emitting water in the sleeve itself. Hardscape materials should be kept away from any existing trees. You don't want to damage any tree roots. Also, you want to make sure that you keep installed paths probably at least 3 or 4 feet away from any new trees that you're putting in, because if they're too close to the new trees, the trees are going to grow up and they're going to break that path as the roots grow. So it's important to make sure to give them space. This is a good example of here of how that was done nicely. Hardscaped paths should be permeable to water and air. One of the biggest concerns that we've seen from cities is they don't want hardscape installed in these park strips that's like concrete or something like that because they want the park strips to still be permeable to water and air. So that's important to them. So you want to use flagstone or pavers or gravel or something like that that allows water and air to pass through. Now we get to my favorite part of the presentation, which is plants. Plants should be water-wise, compact and tough. Salt tolerance is recommended. And honestly, we strongly discourage the removal of any existing healthy trees in a park strip. We recommend designing around them, being careful when you're around them. We don't want trees to be killed during this process, but by all means, if there's an unhealthy tree or an unsafe tree in a park strip, you might as well make it part of this project and get that hazardous tree or dying tree out of the park strip as part of the project. So with water conservation and waterwise landscapes, there tends to be a lot of all or nothing thinking or extreme thinking. A lot of people want to remove all the lawn and just put rock in and call it good. And yes, that does save some water. And yes, the water district is after water savings. But in my opinion, that is an overcorrection to the issue. I would ask all of you to think a little bit about what problems we would cause if we just went out and ripped up all the lawn and put in nothing but rock. Is there landscape sustainability issues? Is there environmental issues? Is there stormwater management issues that are caused by just ripping out the lawn and putting in nothing but rock? And a lot of people will think, well, it's just my landscape and it's just this one park strip that I'm doing it to. But what we are promoting is solutions at scale. So we want to make sure that whatever we're promoting and whatever we're paying for is a more sustainable solution, not only for water conservation, but for the environment and stormwater management, and just the health of people overall. So that's something to consider. I think the other reason lawn gets ripped out and rock is put in and nothing else is people think it's a no maintenance situation. But you know as well as I do, and you can see in this picture that that's just not the case. You can see weeds growing in this rock here. Also, plant height is something to consider. Plants must be shorter than 24 inches. That doesn't have anything to do with trees. That's just the ground level plants, so the perennials and the shrubs. They must be shorter than 24 inches. So you can see in this picture here, while that park strip looks really nice, I've got some nice hollyhocks there that are doing well. That creates safety and visibility issues for the public walking on the sidewalk and for cars in the street. It's hard to be able to see people on the sidewalk or that need to cross the road or people backing out of driveways. So it's important to keep plants under 24 inches. Plant density is an important consideration. We've seen all sorts of different densities applied over the years, from low density to kind of a mixed density that you see there in the middle where it's got areas with plants, but then just some rock areas, and then high density on the right. So as a best practice and a requirement for the Flip Your Strip program, plants must cover 50% of the ground plane at maturity. So that is something that we'll be checking for when we come out to give out the rebates for this program. You can see an example here of what we typically see on the left when we arrive at a property. But we know how big the plants get eventually, and we can say, okay, these plants are small now and aren't covering most of the ground now, but we know how big they're going to get, and we can predict plant density at the end. So you can see in 2020, it's actually gone over 50% plant density at the ground level. Mulch, there's different options with mulch. You can use gravel, river rock, chat, decomposed granite, crusher fines, bark, compost. These are all fine for the park strip program. They help to retain soil moisture, keep weeds down, and really material is a matter of preference. For us, it doesn't matter, but the main thing that we want to see is 3 to 4 inches of mulch installed when we come to check out these finished projects. And you can see here in this picture, people have gotten pretty creative. Here's a nice mixture. It's almost like a dry riverbed pattern that they've installed with rock. And then they've used compost or a bark mulch material there to meet the requirements. So this was actually really well done, and we've seen people get really creative with their designs. Ground cover plants can count as the mulch. They would count as a living mulch if it will cover 100% of the park strip at maturity. So it needs to be able to cover the whole park strip or the whole area at maturity to count as the mulch. This is a concept that you landscape professionals probably understand, but it's something that we run into with homeowners that they don't understand. So we're going to talk about it a little bit right now. We want to make sure the plants are actually being put in the soil itself. We see sometimes where the plants are actually installed in the mulch and actually don't get put in the soil, especially with that thicker layer of mulch. So the idea is to put the root ball in the ground and then just taper the mulch away from the base of the plant. So in the main areas of the park strip, you've got 3 to 4 inches, but as you get close to the base of the plant, it tapers down so that plant can breathe a little bit. Here's park strip maintenance that we're going to talk about now. Establishment watering is important. New plants can't handle long periods without water. We recommend watering every other day for the first 2 weeks, especially in the middle of the summer and especially with really small plants to get them going. After the first 2 weeks, you can scale back the watering to 2 to 3 times per week or as needed. What's being shown on this picture is an area in the garden where we have inline drip irrigation installed. So that blue drip line has emitters built into it. And you can't see the other lines that are in this this planting bed because they're 18 inches apart. But this little plant that we just put in the ground, the Coreopsis, has a tiny little root ball. And one thing that we found with the inline drip irrigation is it's not great at establishment watering because plants with really small root balls, sometimes the inline drip irrigation can miss them. Because let's say, I don't know, Amanda, can you see my hands, what I'm doing here?
I can.
So you have an inline drip irrigation line here, one here, and a plant with a small root ball installed in the middle. The water typically comes out of those inline drip emitters in a cone underneath the ground, and sometime that little root ball could be missed by the cones of water coming out of the ground. So that's really an issue, mainly with really small plants. Bigger plants don't seem to have the same issue. And then once established, and this usually happens in 1 or 2 growing seasons, the waterwise park strips should be watered deeply and infrequently. So once the plants have an established root system, they should be watered once per week for about an hour. That's our recommendation. Things can be adjusted from there. But for instance, most of the plants at the Conservation Garden Park get watered every 7 to 10 days or so once they've been established. And we usually run the drip line for about an hour or so, depending on how fast the emitters are putting out the water. But I think waterwise park strips installed with drip irrigation actually helps to solve one of the biggest maintenance mistakes that we see in landscapes, and that's watering everything as if it was lawn. So you can see in this picture here, this isn't a park strip, but you see this a lot where these big impact rotors are watering the lawn and they're watering those little planting beds and everything's getting watered as if it's lawn. So from a water use perspective, it may as well all be lawn because it's being watered that way. And you're just promoting weed growth when you water like this. So flipping the park strip, putting in drip irrigation and mulch really helps to reduce the amount of maintenance in an area. We also have a Localscapes weed control recipe that helps to keep weeds down. First is watering with drip irrigation, applying 3 to 4 inches of mulch, avoiding soil compaction. This is a huge one. If there's an area in the landscape or the park strip where you're going to be walking on or driving on over and over again, it's best to put in an actual path for that. If you expect to be doing that in the same area over and over again, because if you have compacted soil, the plants that you want to grow will struggle in that area, but there are certain weeds that will take advantage of that situation. Also, you want to minimize soil disruption. At the Conservation Garden, we promote no-till gardening. So once the plants and the landscape has been installed, there shouldn't be any more soil disruption or tilling going on in that planting bed. If you do that, you're just creating more weeds to take care of because you're just waking up weeds as you pull the seeds to the soil surface. And then use herbicides only after trying the first 4 steps. So if you're maintaining park strips or landscapes and you're applying enormous amounts of glyphosate or Roundup, typically one of the first 4 things is not being done. If you do the first 4 things correctly, you don't have to use as much herbicide. Another maintenance mistake we see is using landscape fabric. Weed barrier fabric kills soil microorganisms. Also, it only works on weeds temporarily. Weeds will grow right on top of it eventually. We've seen it decrease plant health and kill plants at Conservation Garden Park. And it should only be used under hardscaped areas and paths where the installation requires it. My biggest issue with landscape fabric is it doesn't do what it's advertised to do. That's my biggest issue with it. Also, it kills plants, and whatever junky soil you start out with when you put on the landscape fabric, that is the same junky soil you will always have because there's no way to make it better now that the landscape fabric is there. Any questions before I go into specifics on plants, Amanda?
We have one about the availability of the PowerPoint after the class.
So I believe that I am recording this presentation. So we will make the presentation available on YouTube, but we can send out a PDF of the presentation in the email afterwards. But we do record our classes and we'll post them on our YouTube channel.
Perfect. I think that's everything for now.
Okay. No one had any responses after I went on my tirade with landscape fabric?
Surprisingly, no.
Okay. Okay, so let's talk about park strip design with plants real quick. And one of the things I would recommend is think about foliage color and texture. If you design with foliage and leaves in mind first, rather than flower color, I think you will be happy in the long run because flowers come and go and are fleeting in the landscape, but foliage color is pretty consistent. And repeating plants to create order in a landscape is nice also. This landscape here that looks actually pretty shady has repeated colors in it. You can see the pinks and the reds repeated in the ground covers. The nice silver color in the lamb's ear or gray color in the lamb's ear is repeated. And you can see it's repeated on the other side of the sidewalk too, which is nice to help unify the park strip with the rest of the landscape. Here's some full sun favorites. So we're going to talk about specific plants that we recommend. First is sun dancer daisy or soul dancer daisy. This is an extremely popular plant. It's actually hard to come by a lot of times because one, we talk about it, so people want to buy it. But it is a super blooming native. So we've had some, I would say the typical bloom season is April through November, which is listed here. But we have some in a few spots at the garden that are a little hotter spots, microclimates. We've seen this plant blooming in February sometimes. I think we've even seen it blooming into December, depending on the season, but it blooms a long time. Pretty small plant. The mound of foliage is maybe 10 inches tall at the most, 8 inches, and then it's about a foot and a half tall when the flowers are on top of it. Chocolate flower. This one blooms for a long time and has the big advantage of smelling like chocolate, which is really cool. It tends to do this mainly in the mornings and the evenings. During the daytime when it's really hot, the flowers and the petals go away and the flowers close up. But in the morning or the evening, it looks really nice and has got some nice smell to it. Not a lot of maintenance on this one. One thing I would say though is it doesn't have the most tidy appearance. So your client would have to be okay with a little bit more of an unkempt looking plant, but overall pretty nice looking. Penstemon, lots of penstemons do really well in park strips here. A lot of them are native to Utah. Tons of varieties you can choose from. Tons of colors available to choose from. Firecracker penstemon on the top, Rondo penstemon on the bottom, but so many do so well. These are probably best suited for a park strip that's watered less frequently than some of the other park strips that we see. Usually too much water will kill these plants. It depends on the specific penstemon, but it's something to be aware of. Silver-edged horehound is one of our favorite plants at the Conservation Garden Park. Beautiful silverish gray leaves with white tinges on the outside. It grows pretty quickly. The ones that we've planted recently get full size pretty close to within a year. They're at full size, but they have a pretty dense mat that they form, and not a lot of weeds can grow up in the middle of it, which makes it a nice selection for the park strip to keep down on maintenance.
Hey, Sean.
Yeah.
We had a quick ask if you can give the plant zone as you're talking about them, but I believe they're all rated for zone 5, right?
Yeah, most of them are going to be zones 4, 5, 6, 7, somewhere in that range. I'm not going to be able to remember them off the top of my head, but we're zone 5, 6 here at Conservation Garden Park. If you are wondering about the zone, I believe if Monrovia will show a lot of them, a lot of the big plant growers will show the hardiness zone. So
Our database does as well.
yeah, yep. So that is one way you can look for it. But yeah, the garden's zone 5, zone 6. This is blue grama grass. The specific variety is called Blonde Ambition. This is a really nice looking plant. Has a lot of different interesting textures and seed heads and foliage changes throughout the year. Super low maintenance, stays about that right height that we want to see in a park strip. We've actually planted some of them in big swaths of several hundred plants at the garden, and they're just such an easy plant to maintain. It ends up being one of the lowest maintenance areas in the garden. Fire chalice or zauschneria. This is a low spreading ground cover. It is not evergreen. It will die back to the ground in the winter, but will come back up the next year. Most of them are a foot tall or less, depending on the cultivar or variety or species that you buy. We're starting to see some changes in the flower color though. So some reds, and we've even seen some pinks out there that can be purchased. Agastaki hummingbird mint. There's some new varieties on the market that are smaller, shorter, that are better for the park strip. Some of the older species that haven't been bred into new cultivars are like the straight species, like Agastaki rupestris. It's too big for the park strip, too gangly, but these newer ones stay at the right size. The one thing that we've noticed here, though, is they struggle a tiny bit with the clay soil. Typically, we see some of them not come out of winter alive in the clay soil, especially when it's been a really wet winter. It's almost like the wet clay soil kills the root ball. They would probably do better in sandy soil. Amanda, I know you've got sandy soil at your house. Do you have any of these plants?
I have about 2 of them, and so far they've done well.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so this is one of those plants that does really well. It's not really long-lived, but does prefer some sandier soil, especially when the winter is really wet. Catmint, an old classic, but it does so well in waterwise landscapes. And there's so many varieties and new cultivars that you can buy. And some of them have gotten smaller and more compact, which is perfect for the park strip. There's Cat's Pajamas, Cat's Meow, Little Trudy. These are all newer varieties that stay smaller. But they're just extremely low maintenance and they bloom for so long. They just are a great selection for a park strip. This is blue oak grass. This is an ornamental grass. The main clump of grass is about in the 1.5 to 2 foot tall, wide range. As far as width and height, about 2 by 2. But it has blue-green blades. You can see the seed heads that get put on there. So really nice that way. One thing that I would make note of as far as maintenance with this plant is don't cut it. Most of the ornamental grasses you will cut to a clump on the ground that's maybe a few inches tall and then they grow back. What we've seen so far with blue oak grass is anytime we cut into it, we run the danger of permanently disfiguring the plant or killing it. So how we maintain it is we get a hard, stiff rake or a metal rake, and we brush through it and brush out the old grass blades. And they seem to do really well that way. Let's talk about part shade plants now, or to shade plants. Sedge, lots of different sedge on the market that has done really well for us. This is Blue Zinger in these pictures here that we've actually installed as a lawn. But it does well in the shade. There are some types of sedge other than Blue Zinger that can handle some sun. But this is a great solution if you've got a park strip that has more shade to it with mature trees. Kinnikinick. This is an evergreen ground cover shrub. It is a slow grower, but it stays a really nice height and width for a park strip. There's not a whole lot you would do to this plant to maintain it in a park strip. It kind of just grows and does its thing. You might have to trim off a few dead branches here or there. But other than that, it's going to basically maintain itself in a park strip. Dead nettle. We've had some success with it at the conservation garden. It's grown mainly for its leaf color. Some of them do have some nice looking blooms. They're pretty small though. But this would do well at the base of a tree growing around bigger roots. It should do pretty well in that situation. Hardy geranium. So this one we've used in park strips, we've used it in the main areas of the garden. There are tons of different types of hardy geraniums that you can buy. One of the ones that we've had most success with is Roseanne. It stays a pretty good size for the park strip and can handle the heat. It can handle the clay soil that we have pretty well also. This is Plumbago. Plumbago is a great ground cover. It fills up the ground pretty quickly once it gets going, but it's got cobalt blue flowers, turns like a reddish color in the fall. One thing to note about this plant though is it does tend to be kind of a bully. It doesn't care if you've got other small plants around, it'll just swallow them eventually. So keep that in mind if you're using it in a park strip, but that can be a plus in a park strip too, allowing a plant to just take it over so you don't have to worry about the maintenance as much. Let's talk about park strip trees. Before I get into the trees, the one thing, overarching thing that I'd like to say is you want to make sure that the trees that you put in aren't going to run into power lines or aren't going to cause issues with snow plows. That's one of the main things that we see issues with trees in the park strip is they're causing those problems. Power line, snow plow issues, pedestrian walking issues. Some of you are probably familiar with Colereteria, the golden rain tree. This one is called Golden Candle. This is a very upright golden rain tree. It does not get very wide. It's about 4 feet wide, maxes out about 20 feet tall. It's salt tolerant. It doesn't need a lot of water, can take the heat. The biggest complaint that we hear about golden rain tree is it will germinate seedlings pretty readily, which I don't like either. But I actually have this tree in the HOA property behind my house, and it blooms beautifully. It does put out some seeds, but they're at the very top of the tree, and there tends to be less of them. And for whatever reason, I don't see a high germination rate of seedlings from this tree. So it's not as much of an issue with this specific one. Hackberry, it's a little bit bigger tree, but this is the tree that we've had out along our frontage, along the street on Conservation Garden Park along 1300 West for years now. It kind of has a little bit more of an irregular shape, but it can absolutely be pruned to where pedestrians and snow plows can get around it. It's salt tolerant. It does not need a lot of water, but it is not for use under utility lines because it does get so big. There is a columnar version. I want to say it's called Prairie Sentinel. I may be making that up, but there is a columnar version. I'm just blanking on the name at the moment.
I think you're correct.
Okay. Sometimes I just make stuff up about names, but that seemed right to me, but we'll go with it. Let's see. So Zelkova is a highly used plant here in Utah, and that's because it just does so well for us. One of varieties that we like is called City Sprite. It was made with urban landscapes in mind. There's very little tree litter, so it will drop leaves, but they're pretty easy to clean up. But you're not going to see seed pods or anything like that, or fruit with this tree dropping on the ground. It's smaller, so it can be used under utility lines. This one can be, the City Sprite can be a little bit harder to find at times. So other Zelkovas that we've seen do well, that would probably do pretty well in a park strip situation, is Musashino, which is really upright, more of a vase shape. And then there's one called Wireless, and it was made to have a vase shape, but with a flat top. So it stays lower than utility lines are. So that's another one that you can look for. Ivory silk lilac trees have done really well for us. You can see this one's planted at the conservation garden. It's actually planted in the middle of a concrete patio. And we have some in the north part of the garden that are in a paver patio, but this is a smaller tree. It's got the beautiful lilac flowers. It tends to bloom later than the lilac shrubs, which is nice, to have a little bit extended lilac bloom season. But this is a smaller tree that does really well in a park strip. Crab apples. Some of the older ones you probably wouldn't want to put in a park strip just because of the fruit. But there are fruitless varieties or varieties that have persistent fruit. Here's spring snow crabapple. Maybe gets a touch too wide for my preference. Overall, pretty good for the park strip. But there are new varieties that you can look at that stay more columnar. Raspberry spear is one of them. I think Ruby Days is the name of another one that's more upright. I have one called Red Baron in my park strip that stays a nice columnar shape. It spreads out a little bit, but so far it's been doing really well for me. Here's some ideas for you, some park strip projects that we've seen over the years. So this is one of our first participants. They put in a sedum park strip. So you can see fall 2016. This has been a few months after it had been planted. And then in the summer, it filled in nicely. And this park strip's still doing really well. It's actually just across the street from the garden, but this is one of our first participants. Here's another one. And one of the things that I like to point out about this one is what you see in the park strip is similar to what you see in the main part of the landscape. So the park strip doesn't look like a separate thing from the main part of the landscape. They're unified as the same thing, which is really nice. Here's another one with multiple pathways through it. Great access to the sidewalk and the street. Here's a more simple design with low-growing junipers in the park strip. Here's some ground covers that are used, sedums with a barberry, mixed sedums, creeping thyme. So this is one of the things that we're hoping for. So water conservation is our main goal. But I think one of the things that we can get out of this is just better looking streetscapes in Utah. You can see on the left, that's typically what we're seeing, lots of lawn. And one of the main things that stands out to me in that picture is the utility cable boxes. It's just not the most exciting landscape or streetscape in the world. But on the right, you can see what we're trying to move to, a nicer pedestrian experience, nicer streetscapes, and something that's sustainable and conserves water. Amanda, if you wouldn't mind, can you talk about these last few slides since you run the program, and I'll just click through for you?
Absolutely. So we just wanted to go over our main key requirements as you're working with participants and trying to help them, just ensure that they qualify for the rebate. The things that we're looking for when we go out for our final visit, are they going to meet the 50% plant coverage requirement? Like Sean said earlier, that doesn't include tree canopy. We don't, sit there and do a mathematical equation. We typically just eyeball the park strip and make sure that as it's going to fill in, we typically know what each plant looks like, how it's going to grow. And so then we kind of estimate if it's going to reach that 50% plant coverage requirement. We make sure plants are going to stay shorter than 24 inches at maturity. If we don't know and the homeowner has a plant tag and we can look at it for reference, that's great. If not, we'll typically come back to the office and just get some second opinions about that. We look for 3 to 4 inches of mulch. Someone had asked in the Q&A if rubber mulch qualifies. We don't have any specific requirements as far as mulch type goes. We do recommend that people check with their, whatever city that they're working in and just make sure that the city doesn't have stormwater requirements or require a certain type of mulch. I know some areas in the west part of the valley, a lot of our participants like to use a compacted aggregate or something that's a little bit heavier so it doesn't get blown away. But we, like for the program, we don't have a specific mulch requirement. We also make sure that the drip system's on its own zone. So like Sean mentioned earlier, it can't be paired with overhead spray in the lawn. It can, however, be paired with another drip irrigation zone that's in another area of the landscape. And then the water does need to be able to be turned on for your final visit. So if you're wrapping up a project and it's close to the fall and they're getting ready to turn their water off, or maybe if they're on a secondary system and you know the water is going to be shut off by October 15th, just make sure that they're getting that final visit in before that date. Otherwise, we'll just have to wait until the following spring.
While we're on this requirements page, I'd like to invite the other water districts that are on to talk about any requirements that they see in their area that are maybe different than this or something that they want to emphasize in their area. So Weber Basin, is there anything you want to add to this slide here?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it. Yeah, for anybody that's on that happens to be doing work in Davis or Weber counties, or within the Weber Basin service area, we strongly recommend all of these requirements that Amanda just went over, but we've approached it just slightly different in that because each city actually has jurisdiction over these areas, we've kind of defaulted to what the city's minimum requirements. So in some cases, cities will require a certain percentage of plant coverage, but let's just say an example, they only require 30% coverage. Well, for the program, that would qualify. We wouldn't necessarily require a 50%. You could go to the low end minimum that the city requires in their code, which then makes you have to pay attention to what the city codes are. And we're working with cities to update their landscape codes and encourage this type of program, these types of plantings and so forth. But that's really the only difference is on plant densities for the Weber Basin service area. Everything else is the same. Drip on its own zone, the mulch depth, all those same things. And we will also do a final inspection visit where we measure things and check things out.
Sounds good. Thank you, Dave. Central Utah, do you want to add anything?
I'll just add, we cover multiple counties, and probably most people aren't familiar with what our boundaries are, but we do cover the rest of Salt Lake County that's not covered by Jordan Valley, Wasatch County, Utah County, and then some of the smaller ones that you probably don't do work in, but like Duchesne and Uinta, Stampede, and Juab, and a little portion of Summit. So those are the areas that we cover, and we have notified each of our cities that for this coming year, the residents within their cities can apply for these programs. But after that, if the city hasn't adopted some kind of ordinances that kind of go with this and other programs that we do, then these will no longer be offered in those cities. So that's to encourage the cities to make sure they have the ordinances that will allow this kind of thing to happen. So, but everything else is pretty much the same. We've kind of based our requirements off of what Jordan Valley has.
Sounds great. Thanks, Dave and Casey. My recommendation to all of the landscape professionals that are on the call here is before you assume you know what the requirements are for any area, I would just check into it. Check what the city ordinance is. Check to make sure you know what water district area that you're in, so you understand the requirements that are going to be required of the park strip you're about to install. So that would be my recommendation to all of you.
Hey, Sean, if I may, this is David again, if I may just add one more thing with Weber Basin. That's Casey kind of said their program's open to everyone right now, but it could kind of slow down if the cities don't adopt ordinances. We've done it just opposite. Our program, this rebate program, is only available to the cities that have adopted ordinances. So please check on that. We've got bunches of cities in Davis and Weber counties, and all of them are aware, and all of them are kind of in a process of their ordinances. But right now we only have 3, Layton City, Washington Terrace, and Riverdale, that are officially in the program. We've got a whole bunch more that are in the process of their ordinance review and changes. So if you're doing work, if a resident or somebody calls you up and say, hey, I really want to do this rebate, before you jump in and do all this, they may be unaware that the rebate's not yet available for their city. So that's one of the cautions we throw out there. But we're telling residents all the time, call your cities, encourage them to make sure their ordinances match. The last thing we want to do is go contrary to a city ordinance on this stuff. And so that's why we've approached it this way in our service area.
Sounds good. Thanks, Dave. Amanda, anything else you want to add to this slide before I go to the next one?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Second. Okay, there's the next one.
So I know Dave also put a link in the Q&A for the option to become a Localscapes partner. But if anyone's interested in partnering with us, and that way you can use our logo for our programs, you can go to localscapes.com. And if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, there is this info area where you can just enter that, and then our marketing manager will get in touch with you and give you some options for partnering. And then also, if you go to utahwatersavers.com, that's where all of our residential water conservation programs are. And that's where you'll be directing your clients to go to. They'll need to create an account and then apply for our program. And that way they can get a rebate after you've helped them flip their park strip. You'll want to make sure that they do have their initial site visit done before you remove any lawns so that they can be eligible for the program. So this is our website, Utah Water Savers. You'll want to make sure that your client resides within an area that is participating in the program. Like David was saying, there are certain areas in Weber Basins District where, you know, only selected cities are currently participating. So just have them go ahead and create an account and see what's available to them. You want to make sure they have living lawn. If it's a new project and they don't have any lawn, but they want to put in a waterwise planting bed, they may be eligible for a different program, but not the Flip Your Strip program. So just have them go ahead and apply, look at all the eligibility, and make sure that it's even offered to them to begin with. And then, like I said, just make sure that they have a first site visit before the lawn is actually removed.
Yeah, I would say that that's one of the biggest things is don't start any of the projects without checking into things first. Don't make assumptions and just get rolling without verifying things, because we've had people get burned that way. So
Absolutely. That's probably one of the biggest issues our participants have is just they hire a contractor, they come in, do the whole project, and then they are applying for the program. So make sure they're actually applying before any of the work gets done. And that's for all of our programs.
okay. You want to talk about these next ones too, Amanda?
Sure. This is just an example of a participant where we went out on the final visit and they weren't actually eligible for the rebate after they had done a bunch of work. There are a few different issues. You can see the mulch isn't thick enough. You can just tell easily by looking at it. You can still see all the soil underneath that's exposed. And then also the lawn was still paired with the park strip. That was probably the biggest issue. And then it also wouldn't reach 50% plant coverage at maturity.
Okay.
This is another one that's kind of hard to tell why it was ineligible just, you know, at first glance, but ultimately the problem was that the grasses on the corners were going to get 4 to 5 feet tall. And so they ended up just moving them into other parts of the landscape and then adding some more ground cover. It's really hard to tell that they're going to reach that 50% plant coverage, but there are a lot of ground cover plants that are in there, just kind of hard to see with the mulch. So that is something. There are times where, you know, maybe we're not sure if a plant's going to get too tall or anything. So like I said, that's one of those instances where we may come back to the office and double check with other coworkers or even, want to look at plant tags. So the more information we can get from the participant, the better. So if you give them a plant list and that's something they can give us, that's great.
Okay, cool. I think we have one last slide here. So here's program contact information for the specific areas. I'll make sure when I send out an email after this class is over to include contact information for the specific areas. There's also just general contact information on the Utah Water Savers website. But I would say if you have questions about the programs and you're unsure about what to do on a project, feel free to reach out to us and we can help you out to make sure you have a successful project. Weber Basin, or is there anything that you want to end with as we wrap up here? Anything else you'd like to add?
Oh, no, I don't think so. Just,
Okay.
there's always the encouragement of contractors that are just aware of this. So I think, Sean, you've done a great job knowing what the programs are, knowing some of the parameters, and then becoming partners. I think it's a good idea if you're interested and you want. I truly feel like the way things are going is if you're kind of a little bit opposed. I don't think any of you are that are on here, but if you're kind of a little bit in opposition to the trend of waterwise landscaping, water situations are not going to improve anytime soon. We're growing the population, the state, there's a lot of things going on. This is not going to go away. And so we would just love for all of you to look at this, how this can benefit your business, not be a hinderment necessarily, but you become partner. You understand this, you know how it works, you can help homeowners understand it and help them know how it works. And we end up with beautiful landscapes that save a tremendous amount of water, but they keep the aesthetic, the value, and everything that we're looking for. So I don't have anything else to add. We're happy to answer questions. If some of you do work in Davis or Weber counties and you still have further questions for us specific to our area, then you've got my email there on the screen. You can shoot me something and I'll be happy to contact you. Thanks, Sean.
Dave? Yeah. Central Utah, Casey, is there anything you want to add as we wrap up here?
I'll just say that that's not my email address because Savannah's the one who runs the program in our area. So if you have questions, feel free to email her. She'd be happy to respond and wasn't able to get on today.
Okay, cool. Amanda, is there anything you'd like to add, or is there any questions we can answer before we wrap up?
I'm not seeing any new questions. Oh, actually, there is one asking you to expand on the recommended irrigation for mature trees.
Yeah, so I would say for the most part, mature trees in the park strip have roots that extend into other areas of the landscape, and they can do okay-ish if you removed all the irrigation from them, but really it's best to water them. And with mature trees, really you don't want to be watering within a 3-foot circle of the root of the base of the tree. You actually want to be watering within or extending 2.5 feet out from the base of the tree, because most of the roots that are accepting water or taking in water are not directly at the base of the tree. They actually extend outward. So those are the areas that you want to be watering, especially when you get a tree that's 10, 15 years old or older. Some newer trees you want to be watering right at the root ball, extending a little bit out. But really installing a square or some loops around a tree is going to be the best way to do it. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Amanda.
I don't.
Okay.
And then the
Yeah.
only other thing I was gonna, oh, sorry, go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I was going to just add one more thing about that. In the past, one of the things that I've heard, and this came out of Salt Lake City a while ago, if you guys can recall what Salt Lake City's park strips look like in the older parts of the city, they're really big and wide. Sometimes they can be 15, 20 feet wide, which is really wide park strip. And people were removing lawn and putting in nothing but rock and then not watering anymore. And some of those big mature trees that were in that area started to die. And that's because their root system is not extended to anywhere other than the park strip because the park strip is so wide. So you want to make sure you're watering trees that are remaining in the park strip after you're done with the project. Anything else, Amanda?
Perfect, thank you. The only other thing I was going to add about our specific service area is that if you have a client that lives in South Jordan, they have all of their own programs now. So our programs aren't available to their residents, but if they create an account on Utah Water Savers, they'll be directed to the link to South Jordan's programs. Or if they want to reach out to the city directly, they can definitely help them out. So I know that's something that's been coming up lately.
Yep. Yeah, more and more cities and water districts are coming on board with these programs, which is great. So more and more people can have access to them, but there will be a few changes and differences depending on what city the landscape is in and what water district it's in, which is good to see more and more people come online, but it can be a little bit frustrating, I think, for landscape professionals and homeowners to understand what the requirement is based on where they're installing a landscape, which we understand and we'll work with you on some of those things. So
Yeah, it gets confusing.
It does. Yeah.
And then I just wanted to also make sure that everybody knows this specific program is just a residential program. So the resident has to apply. If you are interested in doing commercial programs, we have some commercial programs available. If you go to our Jordan Valley site, you can see what commercial programs we have. I know Central does as well. So just doing some research with each individual water district is probably a good idea, just to see what we offer and just depending on where you're working. So
sounds good. Well, thanks, Amanda, and thanks, Dave and Hattie Ann and Casey for being part of